We have to get moving. Torschlusspanik, as our German friends say. The panic of a closing door. Thanks for everybody for sticking around. Now we're getting to the really good part of the program. No, I'm just kidding. No, we want to make it worth your while. It's been an amazing day. Thank you to Christina and all the speakers that have come before. We want to try and build on what's come before and then tee things up for Andreas Mundt and all of the Elefantenrunde that'll come at the end of all of the amazing competition officials. I'm Clark Parsons. I run the European Startup Network, which is the association of the startup associations of Europe, kind of meta. And I also run a think tank in Berlin called the Innovate Europe Foundation. We've been fighting for European tech sovereignty before it was cool, I dare say. We want to talk now about startups and scale-ups and how they are going to be the key to Europe finally getting its mojo and reclaiming the sovereignty that we're all here to talk about all day. We have an incredible lineup of people, experts in government, investment, and in the private sector. And so I'm just going to jump right in. A couple things to maybe give us some orientation for those who aren't aware. Tech has gone from 4% to 15% of Europe's GDP in just one decade. We know the Draghi report, we know the Letta report. The key to that, of course, is competitiveness and the innovation, which is what we want to talk about, really making it real. We celebrated quite a milestone last week. Andy has the perfect hat for it. A lot of us own that, EU Inc. Andreas Klinger created that movement more than a year and a half ago, and then after an incredible amount of lobbying and work behind the scenes from his volunteer organization EU Inc., the ESN, Allied for Startups, and a lot of others, and a lot of volunteers, in Davos, Ursula von der Leyen not only said, we're going to do a 28th regime, she said, and we call it EU Inc., which I think blew us all away. So congratulations to Andy. Round of applause, please, for that. That's And again, something we want you to learn from this panel, this is a citizens movement. This is what Europe reclaiming its sovereignty is going to be all about. You saw Esben in a taxi cab. That's a former tech founder who just said, we have to win the war in Ukraine. What can I do? And so this needs to be something everybody takes away from this conference. Yes, we're in Brussels. It's great that they do white papers from the Commission. That's not going to solve everything. We have to solve it, and everybody in this room has a role to play. So let's jump right in. We heard from an admiral. Andreas, I wanted to start with you. We heard from an admiral saying, everybody says don't invest in Europe if you're a VC. You were originally from Vienna, you're based in Berlin now, you worked in Silicon Valley a long time, you returned, and now you're doing a solo fund of your own, and you've just announced your third fund, and it's only focused on Europe. So while some so-called experts are saying, forget Europe, you are doubling down more so. What is it about Europe that has you long, at least in the short term?
Okay, I think I'm supposed to be the optimist on the panel. I think of myself more as a determinist. I genuinely think we have a fuck ton of problems in Europe. Number one, we are idiots, and we act like idiots. And I think we're the only region in the world that invests all of their money in another economy and then complains that their own economy doesn't grow. We're the only region in the world that sends all of their core assets to Asia, sells them for cheap, or outsources to the local supplier network there, and then is confused that we don't have core frontier technology in a time where manufacturing outsourcing of frontier tech equals know-how outsourcing. I think we're the only region in the world that does this as effectively. The idea behind EU Inc. is we think of tech as an industry. The way I think of it is innovation itself. There is no industry where innovation isn't important. There is no industry where new materials, new technologies will not change the whole industry. It doesn't exist, you know? So to make tech innovation or innovation in general work in Europe, we need to fix the underlying infrastructure in Europe. And the main problem we have in Europe is that we play against very large blocks that are large dynamic markets. America, China, in future India. We act as like small little fishing ponds that are loosely connected, and our founders fish in very small ponds. This is the first problem. The second problem is we don't have enough money in VC. The third problem is it's really hard to hire here. Fourth problem is we don't have an exit market. And if you think about this as a loop, We have none of those on pan-European level, and we are wondering why we're falling behind against larger blocks. The number one thing we need to do in Europe, and I'm not saying federalize or anything like this, it's like use continental scale. We need pan-European solutions because all of this, what our founders face here, the people who are trying to create the next generation of innovation, is a pan-European problem. And we cannot fix this on Slovenian level, Dutch level, or whatever level, not even German level. This has to be fixed on European level. That's the only level you can fix this. The idea behind EU Inc. is to fix the first part, which is get quickly started and raise money quickly. And also be able to issue stock options to your best employees because you're not able to pay competitively anyway. And this is the core idea behind EU Inc. The way we do this is by creating a new legal entity. Think of it as like a GmbH or UK Limited or whatever you want to think about it. And this entity needs to be available all across Europe and available to anybody. Because as an investor, I cannot tell you how the next generational defining startup will look like. I don't know, and it's my job to know. I don't expect Brussels to know how it looks like. And also, quite frankly, I don't care if somebody wants to build an innovative company or an ice cream shop company, as long as this company becomes GDP driving and important for that region, I don't mind how innovative it is. So the very important fact for us is that it's for everybody. And the compromise that we have here is we say if it has to be for everybody, we don't expect Germany or France or anybody to actually be willing to give their biggest taxpayers to Brussels, basically, or biggest employers. So we say keep employment and taxation out of this, focus on corporate law, standardization of all the infrastructure, and if you want to do taxes or employment, do those in sandboxes for specific small groups. Like if there is groups where you want to do this. And EU Inc., we managed to get in Brussels to the point that Brussels itself calls it EU Inc., which is either a very good sign or the worst communication challenge I ever had. Let's see. I don't know yet. The next few weeks we'll decide. But just to say, this is one part of this whole loop. And we also need all the other parts. And I hear a lot of people in this room as well of all the things that somebody should be doing. I genuinely think we are the generation who fixes Europe, or we have 10 years, 20 years and we're screwed. So I don't think of myself as an optimist. I think of myself as a determinist who is determined to do certain things to improve the region. And I genuinely think we have to be the people who do this. Bias to action is an underdeveloped resource in Europe, and we need to fix that.
Thanks, Andy. We'll definitely dive in a second with Anna and EU Inc. and what the Commission is working on. But I want to stay with Nick on the investment side because Planet A Ventures, you're deploying a lot of capital also in Europe, across borders, not just in your own country. Give us an idea. I think you're doing, we talked last night, you've made 3 robotics investments lately. Let's talk about some of the strengths. What are some of the things that we're maybe undervaluing that are things we can build on where we have a really great shot on the global market already?
Test. Yeah, happily. Maybe as a quick intro on why I and also Andreas even have a seat here on this table. I think it's important to appreciate why venture capital needs to be in the room. If we look into the US, only 5% of all companies have received venture, and they make up more than 60% of the S&P 500. So it's really about building visions early on. And something that has tremendously impacted my and our thinking at Planet A about what we want to invest into was a recent trip to China that I did in July last year. So I got the possibility to meet with the management of CATL and BYD and a couple of Scaleups in China, in battery, in solar panels, in hydrogen electrolyzers and so on. And it was partially an extremely frustrating and partially a mind-blowing experience because it was just so much quicker than what we've seen here. And there was 3 core things that we figured out were differently to Europe, and surprisingly it wasn't that the state was throwing subsidies at them with no ends. That wasn't the case at all anymore, but really what is the difference in supply chain speeds. So everything is much quicker available at much lower prices. The talent pool depth And lastly, how differently the buying personas, the ICPs are. So suddenly you have a BYD that if they are convinced that this is a good idea, they simply take the buying decision. And if you look, for example, into the German index, of the 40 companies, only 5 have been founded post-World War II. And I think that lethargy, this is what we're seeing a lot, and this is also what we're trying to tackle. And then to your point on what we are currently focusing on, some of the Germans in the room, they get PTSD if I say so, but basically there is 2 hearts in my chest, as Goethe would say. A part that is extremely bearish about Europe, when I think about how lethargic part of it is, and the other part that is extremely bullish. And I love my job because my job is very simple in the sense that I can start on a green canvas, so can you. So we can back ideas where there is currently not that much in place already, and that can be an incredible place. And so, when we think about Europe and what we're extremely excited about, then robotics is one of the things that comes to mind. While I absolutely am willing to hear any argument that anyone can make about the electric stack being lost to China, meaning embedded compute, power electronics, electrical engines, and storage, this is surely not the case when it comes to the software layer. And some of the companies that we are seeing excel, where we see some of the best talent that we've ever seen founding any companies in Europe right now, are in robotics. One of the companies we funded, they basically do real-time mapping for closed-loop autonomous fleets. So imagine your warehouse fleet, and suddenly you have someone pushing forward something into the pathway, and that fleet or that map needs to be updated for the entire fleet. And that type of talent that is building those companies is absolutely crushing it. And I think what's giving me hope at the end of the day, and why I'm also not blushing sitting on the panel that is really making a case for Europe, is that there is a couple of things that are coming together right now. We have EU Inc., we have the Eurostack, we have the Draghi plan, we have a lot of initiatives, and I start to see them actually gain traction. I start to see them mobilize capital, and what is most telling to me is, if I look into my LP base, so we are backed by some of the European state funds, like an IFO, like an EIF, like a KfW, but also some of the large European corporates, like Allianz, a BMW, a RAFAEL, which is a large German retailer, some of the chemical companies, and they are all having the same conversation that we are having today. Not necessarily with the same sophistication always, but everybody is doing this, and everybody's going through the quickest mandate change that they've ever seen, where there is a widespread appreciation of the interdependence and interconnectivity of problems. I cannot have a conversation around climate change without also having a conversation around European sovereignty, because the democratic muscle is the muscle that allows us to build things that are bigger than itself.
Super. Thanks, Nick. This is, we've been talking about, let's do it ourselves. But Anna, we of course are grateful for anything that the Commission can do. And as a representative from the European Commission, it should be noted that for the first time now we have a Commissioner of Startups, which is, was already a pretty big move for the EU. Anna, you've been working in the Commission for 2 decades now, and you're part of the task force that is hopefully going to be delivering some of the key things that we need to put a little more wind at our backs in the ecosystem. We have a startup and scale-up strategy coming. We have an Innovation Act coming. Of course, we've been talking now about the 28th regime. Give us an idea right now, because I think we're maybe a couple months away from hearing some concrete plans that we can all try to start pushing.
Well, thank you very much. I'm definitely an optimist on the panel. And it doesn't mean that I'm not a realist. I think that you've given us a diagnostic of Europe in very direct terms, ones that I would probably not be allowed to do, view my obligation to be politically correct. Yes, indeed, the Commission decided to put startups at the heart of innovation, at the heart of the policy drive. At that time, not yet at the heart of sovereignty, but I think we're getting there. But it is not only the title of the commissioner. It is also that we decided not to solve the problem, each Directorate General in their own corner. We decided to bring people together and analyze the issues in all the areas that you said, in the access to finance, in the regulatory simplification, with the access to markets, with the issue of data, with the issue of skills. This is a little bit of a startup within the Commission, and I can assure you that Europe is difficult, but working with a startup mentality within the European Commission is really an exploit. We are not wired for that. When I went to the first meeting of the task force, I said to my colleagues, if what we do does not increase the revenue for startups, reduce their costs, reduce complexity, or reduce time, we may be doing interesting things, but we are not working for startups. So we've mapped the universe, we set up the ambition, but okay, we still are faced with horrendous amount of procedures and systems, pages and pages of legal basis, which needs to be changed one comma at a time. And I'm not going to give you more details because it's the last panel. I would go to sleep right here. It is a horrendous amount of work. Having said that, we need to speed up. And that's why all the actions announced in the strategy, we said we will put on the table within 2 years, a year and a half, really. Now, there's obviously things that are more exciting than others. Obviously, 28 regime, EU Inc., very much at the level of ambition to really make sure not only that we do something that you guys like, but that the companies will actually pick it up. Because, we have a wonderful European company legislation. Nobody's using it. It's Società Europea. You've probably never heard of it. Well, we didn't get it right. We had the right instinct that we needed, but we didn't get it right. This time around, we need to get it right. We need to make sure that people understand that we got it right. And we then need to encourage people to take advantage of it, to be the first movers, to really do that, to really show to others that it is simplifying things, then staying in their own regulations. On the finance, we have a fantastic story. Many of you probably know this, but when I started at the Commission, the perception in Europe was that VC is something that you invest money with the expectation and the level of inflation, but you take a lot of risk. Within 20 years, together with the European Investment Fund, we have built VC in Europe. Today, VC in Europe has returns at the level of the US, our benchmark competitor, collaborator, and friend. But it took 20 years, and we still have a fifth of VC in Europe, right? So we need to speed up. If there's one lesson from the panel before us, and that's what Jacques Delors said, Europe grows according to its crisis. I think we're living a really serious one. And if we do not take sovereignty at the European level, and the market at the European level, and the solutions at the European level, then I unfortunately agree that in 10 years' time, we're going to be preparing for sunset.
Well, let's pick things up there. Thank you, Anna. I want to move upstream. Yeah, the optimist. The optimist is all.
We are going to do this. Can I make one more appeal?
You please,
right.
But make it optimistic.
It's definitely optimistic. So I told you there is, you all know the expression that you can bring the horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. Our job is to get the horse from the race course, when they have to go over obstacles, and really get it to water in a simple way. But ultimately, the appeal is it needs to happen in Europe. And our experience is that even when it's possible, people are not doing it. So there's also a lot of work that we are doing in the form of recommendations to remind people, you can do it. There's nothing in the legal base that prevents you from doing it. You don't need to have a target or an obligation. You can do it. The member states can get people relatively easily on the basis of the existing directives. You can do the investment. There is no blockage to invest part of your pension funds into the innovative economy. We are not going to have sovereignty one EU member at a time. We're either going to get sovereignty together or we're not going to get any. So that message is also very powerful to the European corporates. You said yourself, European corporates are not investing enough, but they're investing in Asia, right? We have to also believe our own European story. And this is the reason I remain optimistic.
That's great, yeah. I mean, the capital's there. It's just going into New York real estate and Silicon Valley VC. So we've just got to get it, got to get the stream turned around. Let's go a little higher up in the innovation stream. I want to get to Travis and Moritz in a second, but first, Rafael, I'd love to return to you. We started the day with you. we've talked a lot about speed today and the need to speed up. You're doing disruptive innovation at this agency in Germany, which is really a lighthouse for many. So I'm going to ask you the sort of fresh question. When are we going to start seeing some of the results of this breakthrough innovation you've been funding hit the marketplace? Because we need it to go as fast as possible. Are you also trying to get speed into the innovation system?
Are you from German Parliament?
From your mouth to God's ear.
So the song I sing on this question usually is that I say, from the lab to the impact of that innovation, it usually takes some 15 years. When you start a company, even OpenAI is in its 12th or 13th year, so that takes time. AI is in its 80th year, 80. So you never know. Now, we invented lasers and didn't know what to do with it. Now we wouldn't be doing anything without lasers. Heinrich Hertz, who invented the electromagnetic, who discovered that we have electromagnetic waves, said it's probably not very useful, but interesting, right? Okay, wrong, but it took decades before we figured that out. So it's very hard to predict. Of course, on your way, you have KPIs. So the first one was we were afraid that nobody gives an F or there is no disruptive innovation going in Europe. Answer wrong, because we had 400 applications in the first year already. And still nobody knows us. Back then, nobody knew us, right? A little less don't know us now, but 85% of the people in Europe in Germany don't know us, 95% in Europe, but still we're getting those applications. The quality of the applications, second KPI, 3% of the applications finally went into funding instruments and other instruments. At SPRIND now it's more like 7%. The number of applications per year went from 400 to 650 last year. So that's all numbers that you can do. Number two, it took us 4 years to free ourselves from the shackles of what was applied to us when we were, invented by the government, but of course it was implemented government style, and I found, a prisoner of government called SPRIND, and we had to put those shackles off. By law, it took us 4 years to get this law done, but now we have it. Now for 2 years we can work the way we think we should, which means, for example, we can co-invest with the private sector, we plug into EIC, we can leverage the instruments on the European level, and our time to money, which is the most critical KPI for project, we have an open call for projects, is about 8 to 9 weeks, and for challenges, it's 14 days, meaning from your application to the challenge, there will be 2 weeks, the jury works, invites you, you pitch, if you win, you send your invoice, you get your money, that's 14 days. So this is how you speed up innovation. And Draghi picked this up in the Draghi document and put some pressure on EIC to go faster. They're increasing their speed, they're coming down from a year to 6 months and hopefully to 3 months, right?
Look, I mean, if we can get our control people to do a little secondment with you, it'd be great.
You need a freedom law just like we have it, because that's absolutely true. The whole governance of EIC is still way too complex, and we need to get away of all these layers of distributed responsibility, which means responsibility diffusion. Nobody is responsible anymore if it's all so granular that each decision piece is so small that it doesn't mean anything. So innovation managers at EIC can recommend projects, but there's another board who decides who gets the money. With SPRIND, our governance is innovation managers decide who gets the money, full stop. If it's more than 10 million, our board will check whether we've been working properly, but not whether they think we should fund this project. That's what we decide. So we can put in a lot of money and decide it very short term in our board, and that's the way to get time to money down. Next KPI is how many private co-funding do we get from venture, from corporate venture, from industry, because we need all these players for a reality check eventually. When your valley of death is sort of very steep in the beginning, there's no private interest yet. We de-risk until it becomes interesting for the private sector. And I'm very surprised what risk appetite we're seeing, like Marvel Fusion, you all know that, right? They're pretty, I mean, this will take another 10, 15 years before they have a product out in the market. Of course, on their way, they're developing a lot of interesting technology. They raised 115 million euros, and Sprint only had to do 5. So we're leveraging our money by a factor of more than 20 with this. With Proxima Fusion, we did 0 because the private sector was so interesting. With RWE, which is a big utility company, we did a 50-50 round for Focused Energy, which is another of such fusion companies. And we see that now happening more and more. We're leveraging our money currently at a factor of 3.5. We intend to go to 20, meaning each government euro that we're spending will pull in 20 euros from the private sector and from the industry. That's another KPI, because now you're doing a reality check, because now the non-government investors that look on returns are investing into your project. Next step then is how many of these companies grew to a place where they became unicorns. And I think we're going to see the first sprint-driven unicorn this year already. And we're in our 6th year, right? That's not so bad, right? Creating a unicorn after 6 years. And we're going to see more of those. I mean, in the next 24 months, it's probably going to be 3 or 4 at least. My ambition is it's going to be 6. And then one of those companies will deliver a high-impact product. It's not going to be fusion in the next 3 years, so don't hold your breath. But we have an Alzheimer's potion candidate in clinical phase 2. The phase will be over in 18 months. Then we go to phase 3. This company then, when we survive 2, will be a unicorn. And then in phase 3, we will very quickly see whether we can do something about Alzheimer's. And that's, I don't need to tell you what the impact of that is. And that then is a real breakthrough innovation, right? That then comes to the world very quickly because so many people are suffering from it. So the authorities will allow the application of this medication very quickly, and then it has an impact on people, right? And then we've created that not just the unicorns and decacorns, but we've solved one of the big questions of our time. And so you have to go down this route. Of course, compressing this is the real challenge, and that's your original question. And you have to really dig into each individual details. Bureaucracy is a collection of, stupidity, because it's just the way we always did it, and we're not thinking about why we're even doing it anymore, but we're still doing it. Now, if you show up and say that this is stupid, everybody is pissed because that's what they've been doing for 30 years. Right? It can't be stupid because we're doing it for 30 years. So Sprint, we're always this agent of telling or creating a feeling in the people that they're stupid, because we're saying, why are we even doing this? The king is not wearing any clothes. This is really stupid. Can we just skip it? Get away with it. And you know better than I, breaking up these stupidity processes is just a lot of work. It's very granular, like getting a freedom law. I mean, think of the irony. We had to create a law. It's called the Sprint Freedom Law, to get freedom from laws. Right? You go like, okay, we create a law that frees us from. Okay, that's. I mean, this is. In German we called it ganz formaler Wahnsinn. To be very normal stupidity, very formal stupidity.
Yeah, your first innovation was innovating how innovation is administered in the government. Is that theoretically the best innovation you guys did? Because now everyone's copying it. I mean, Jörg here, it's great to see you in the audience. This is the spirit again of people that have been doing it in tech for a living, joining quote unquote the government, or putting on that coat briefly to say, I'm going to be a part of the solution. So thanks for doing that. Let's go a little more upstream on the tech, because Moritz, we're talking about investment. Deep tech is one of the most capital-intensive investment areas we have in Europe. Your company, Global Foundries, I think just committed last fall 1.1 billion in Dresden for building chips. Your company's, of course, building chips in New York and Singapore. You could theoretically just shut down Dresden. So it's great that you're there. Give us an idea of what is still keeping this company in Dresden. What are we doing right in Europe at this really crucial hardware structural layer?
With pleasure, but maybe let me start with a few basics, because my feeling is, after 2 years working for GF, that many people don't really understand how complex is what we're doing. And I remember one of my first days, one of my colleagues told me, rocket science, that's kindergarten in comparison. And it's true. Yeah. If you look at the latest ASML EUV machines, the technology is incredible. It's absolutely mind-blowing. What they do in a nutshell is they shoot a laser 50,000 times a second on tiny tin droplets, which after the third time will expand, then create a plasma, which is 40 times warmer than the surface of the sun. And then you get this extreme ultraviolet light, which you need to actually produce the chips. And the lasers of Trump, German company, they are so precise, you could hit a golf ball on the moon with it. And the mirrors of size, another German company, if you were to expand them to the size of Germany, the highest elevation would be 0.1 millimeter. They're the best mirrors in the world. And this is just part of the technology. One of these machines will cost you about 350 million euros. If you want to produce leading edge chips, you need about a dozen, then you already spend 4 billion. And you just bought a few tools. So yes, it is very capital intensive. Now getting back to your question, but for me this is very important because in so many meetings here in Brussels, one of the main problems I really see is lack of knowledge. People are not aware how the industry works, how complex things is, and also if there's any industry which is globalized, it's the chips industry. And as Virkun rightly pointed out on Monday, without chips we don't have anything. Why Dresden? Why Dresden? Because simply our industry works in ecosystems. And you cannot just simply put a fab in the middle of nowhere, but you need ecosystems which have grown over time. In Dresden, the origin they go back to the 1960s in the GDR. Then after the German reunification, we had smart politicians. They made the right decisions and people set up shop, including us. Back then it was AMD, later Infineon, XFAB, Bosch, now ESMC, joint venture of TSMC, and XP, Infineon joined. And this is how it works. You need the access to the research institutions, you need access to suppliers, to universities. And in terms of statistics, we all managed to be competitive in Dresden. Right now, about 1/3 of chips being made in Europe come from Dresden. With all the current projects being implemented in Dresden, that number will rise to half of the chips made in Europe. So it's a very easy decision why Dresden. And for us as a company, it also makes sense to continue to be invested in Dresden. One other aspect which people must understand is you need scalability. Fixed costs are very high, so you need to be able to have a large footprint to grow with the market, which is growing about 10 to 12% per year. And you need to grow with it to also then compete on a cost level with other regions of the world, where, for instance, in Asia, energy costs probably 1/3 an average of what they are in Europe. Labor costs are also cheaper. So what it means then from a European perspective is then you must be even more competitive in other areas, be it fab automatization or just by building better technology. And that's also one of the strengths we have in Europe. We're very good in R&D and we're very good in research and development.
Super, that's great, Moritz, thanks. I'd like to go actually from now, let's say the base layer of tech, if I dare say, to one of the higher layers of tech, which is obviously software. Travis Oliphant is with us. If you were in the Python community or the open source world, you would consider the nerd lord to be in the room with us, as I've heard him described in Davos. Fellow American, lives in Austin, but Travis has really been one of the pillars of developing the open source software world, underpinning a lot of what you've been using in most of the products that you've been using. And one of the early conversations we had really blew me away because Travis, with his company OpenTeams, had a client called Palantir. So you've been supplying a lot of the companies that we consider to have giant moats and to be untouchable. I mean, there's sort of a myth in Europe that like, well, we've kind of lost the first round of the software wars to the American companies. And you say, actually, no, we're still in it because your open source base layer would let us build 1,000 Palantirs right now if we wanted to. So I'd just love to get your perspective. You've been hearing this dialogue as well about European tech capabilities and where we need to go. Give us an idea of why we might be more capable and freer than we maybe think in our heads about software.
Yeah, I really appreciate the chance to be here, and I feel very honored to be among so many folks who are talking about things that I'm trying to get into. My background has been a scientist, then an open source contributor, and then an entrepreneur, and then finally doing some investment, including investment in Europe. I think the point that I would really love to make is a lot of the innovations of the past 10 years, cloud computing, all the hyperscalers, what were they made possible by? A young Finnish programmer named Linus Torvalds, right, who actually created the Linux operating system. That undergirded the hyperscaler movement entirely. And yet, so why is it that that happened in Seattle and Silicon Valley and not in Dresden or in Berlin? I think those are some interesting questions. I think we're hearing some of the reasons. I think part of the reason I'm here also is because I've been asking that question for myself for a long time. What led me on my journey is how do you have open source as a foundation and then build reproducible, scalable, profitable businesses on this thing that you're giving away? That's actually been my whole quest for the past 25 years and learn some things. So perhaps some of the hope is, get to know some of you here and maybe share some of those lessons for that you can take advantage of in Europe, because you are fundamentally massive contributors to the open source ecosystem. Not only Linux, the other massive innovation over the past 5-10 years is the AI revolution. Well, the AI revolution is powered by a little language called Python. Right? And there's a Python documentary that just came out, and you can watch it on YouTube, and you see a bunch of people in it, but guess where it starts? It starts in a little research institution in Amsterdam, in Holland, in Netherlands. Like, Guido van Rossum was in the Netherlands when he invented Python. So yet another innovation that fundamentally has changed the foundation of innovation, and everybody is using it, including the aforementioned companies who are doing all the AI innovation. They're using these tools. I know because I've been a part of the conversations with these folks for a long time. And so what is it that has made that innovation innovate forward? I think some of the lessons are here. I think we're learning them from the fine people around me. But I think that's one of the things I'm here to communicate is that, no, the opportunity is still massive. We are, for example, I've been innovating in company formations, company approaches, ways to, with just a little bit of capital, actually innovate, return to investors. You may not have to wait 20 years. Some of the VC, I actually think the era of the Americanized VC is not necessarily going to be the era of how profits are distributed in the future. I think some of that is actually a bit of an anomaly of the past 40 years or 60 years of kind of since World War II, how finance works. But it doesn't have to work that way. Fundamentally, you can return to investors productive capital by serving and innovating. And open source is a massive equalizer. And today, my company, OpenTeams, half of our developers are in Europe. In fact, one whole company that specializes in bringing open source to communities, from communities to companies, is 80% in Europe. And actually, the CEO lives actually a digital nomad throughout Europe, where he's based in. So this is something I think that I just want to make sure and communicate. We have an open source operating system for sovereign AI systems called Nabari. With Nabari, you can actually build your own AI system that starts to rival the Claude, XAI. I'm not saying if you want, you'll have to spend a bunch of money if you want to rival the massive supply chain they're providing, all the massive people they're supporting. But if you want an AI that serves you with your data and keeps your data sovereign, you can absolutely do that today, often for less than 5 to 10 million.
Super. Thanks, Travis. We don't have a ton of time, and I think there have been so many really great inputs from you guys. I would actually just like to do a round in which everybody just responds to something that they've been hearing that that I know has given you some thoughts. I mean, Andreas, I see you furrowing your brow. One of the things that I, of course, also think about with you is, I follow you on LinkedIn and Twitter, and you've given me an incredible amount of optimism about you've been finding the most innovative startups and scale-ups in Europe and profiling them, and so that belief is coming from somewhere. So if you don't have a question for others on the panel, I'm just curious to know what's driving that optimism that you're seeing on the ground.
So for context, what he's referring to, I started a YouTube channel, which my wife calls a midlife crisis, which I don't disagree with, to be very fair. And the main idea behind the YouTube channel is actually to change narrative. too much of the European brand is actually fed to us from the outside. I'm not only talking about the negatives, even the good parts. Like I was in the States and like for 5-6 years and everybody was like, yes, but you Europeans love easy living and like not working hard. I'm like, what? Like, where's this coming from, you know? Like every team I was like worked harder in Europe than any team I worked ever in the States, you know? Like where's this from? So much of the narrative is actually American or like international on Europe. And what I want to do with the YouTube channel specifically is go to companies that are potentially number one in the world in their field and just happen to be in Europe. And also I want to do it as non-intellectualized as possible. So not going there and like a panel or like a podcast and everybody has like a smart thing to say. Literally camera, point at the thing, explain me what it does. Like as raw as it gets. The idea is that young people that are thinking about like what should I do have actually a little bit of like a pattern to follow, like an inspiration, if this makes any sense. And I hope that like we want to invest like the whole year into this. That this becomes the main thing I'm known for, like not the fund. You know, the fund is like working quite well, like in statistics, like it's a 1 to 5% top tile fund in the world. So like, I'm happy about that. Not the policy stuff, hopefully, but actually like just shaping the narrative on Europe itself and European identity itself. And that's like to me super important because I don't know about you guys, but like I feel like we don't really have a European identity. We have very strong national identities. And especially in the startup ecosystem a few years ago, if you wanted to define a European founder, people would have most likely used negatives instead of actual positives. So like this whole rethinking of identity and narrative is something I care personally deeply about.
That's great. I mean, I see at least on you know the feed that's not bashing Europe from the US, I actually see a lot of incredible founders who've made a very conscious decision to stay here. You know, when I look at Lovable, when I look at 11 Labs, I mean, incredible founders who have resisted the temptation to go to the Valley and do it here.
This is actually a thing. So I know that policy is a little bit disconnected from tech frequently, but I think it's even more disconnected from grassroots in tech. Like right now, there's a whole generation of hyper pro-European young people, super smart, like they want to make Europe work, they want to make tech in Europe work, and they're like just like blasting it out there, like creating memes and everything. And I think this is like an energy that we are not even, like many people are not even aware of, like how important this is also.
No, I think it's super important. It fires me up every day. Nick, Travis just gave a really interesting comment about maybe the VC model needs a rethink. I see a lot of VCs in Europe actually sometimes doing evergreen funds. Maria Ekeland has 2050. You know, essentially, there's a lot of models in Europe trying to potentially rethink how we're raising and distributing capital and deploying it. Have you guys given any thoughts to that? Because, I mean, Planet A, a sustainability fund, also was thinking much more long term.
Extensively. There is an argument to be made for pragmatism. So as our LPs, if we've heard a bit about the unwillingness of European pension funds to invest in Europe, generally there is an equation between the higher the educational amount that one has to do to convince the LPs, the lower the conversion rate. And so that indexing on pragmatism has usually led us into somehow sticking to the 10+1+1 model that we've been following and rather innovate on the fronts that are more important to us. So, but I think it's ripe for change. But I think it is also like it's somewhat working, right? There is the possibility to then do secondaries or raise follow-on and continuation funds. It's not that like it's really breaking companies down at that stage.
Yeah, actually, I mean, something's wrong in the marketing because, as Anna noted, the returns from European VC have been matching US VC now for 15 years. And yet you talk to anybody and they say, well, you of course need to put your capital in Silicon Valley instead of over here. Anna, let's flip things. You have representatives who are tied deeply into tech communities. You guys, I say you guys, the Commission will be putting some plans forward in the coming weeks, a lot of which we've been hoping for. What can we do to mobilize, or rather, what's the Commission's best hoped for outcome when you put forward a plan for a 28th regime or an Innovation Act? I mean, there'll be a few press releases, you know, rocket emoji on LinkedIn, and that's that. What can we do to make these things realities within the member states?
Well, look, the Commission is not making final decisions. I think you've done a horrendous amount of work to make sure that we come up not what is possible in our heads, because as you rightly said, in some cases we are stupid because we were repeating the same things for a long time. And we have to come back to the position that high ambition needs to be a starting point, even if you believe that it will be negotiated to a certain extent to a lower level. Because then we can mobilize the community in converting one decision maker at a time. And this is about what Andreas done with the Community for 28 regime. We need to build very strong coalitions, the coalitions that are going to be given customized advice where to go and lobby. And it's true, it's not very intellectual. If you need to pour billions in research, you're not going to make your money if your market is Belgium, which we all love to pieces, but it's a very small country, right? We're not going to do much if our time to grant is going to be 2 years, because in 2 years, lots of things will happen. So, you know, this is what you can do. I think what also is very important is the narrative. And the narrative is that perfection is the enemy of pragmatism, right? The only people who do not make mistakes are people who do strictly nothing, except going through the motions, obviously. So we also need the people with control mindset to start questioning their added value for Europe. Because they're very often very convinced Europeans, and they're worried that, you know, people are going to steal €1 million, €1 at a time. I don't care. Or I mean, you know, there's something in the world which is called rounding error. You have to accept it. And we have to accept also in the decision making small margins of risk. We're getting there, right? We've created the EIC. I wish we had the Freedom Act, but we don't. But it's still an incredibly powerful tech investors in Europe. We are going for the Scale-Up Fund, where we will put the decision making into the private sector, precisely to get it away from our control instances, right? But what you can do, you can lobby one decision maker at a time to keep the ambition high and pragmatic.
Super. Thanks very much. I would like to turn, I'm going to let Rafael have the last word, but Moritz and Travis, I'd like to get your perspective once again. Moritz, I'm thinking when you were talking about why you guys are in Dresden, you rightly cited a lot of really old, fantastic tech companies from the Netherlands and Germany. What is it that we can be doing right now in Europe? Because we're talking about sovereignty here all day. And most of the factories that even Global Foundries is deploying are in the US or Singapore. How can we get a few more percentage points of sovereignty in the crucial chip market? Is it more capital? Do we need to do better research? Is our research great, but we're just not fast enough? What, out of you guys' perspective, would be a key to have us move the needle a bit more if our dependence gets weaponized against us in the chip market?
That's a very good question. And let me start maybe with startups and SMEs, where we also spoke about quite extensively. One advantage of Foundries like us is we work with startups, and we also have fantastic startups we are working with in Europe, including Spin Cloud, which is a Dresden-based startup. They develop a neuromorphic chips, which in a nutshell mirrors the brain, and the idea is to have CPUs which will be much more energy efficient as the traditional structure. We're also working with another startup. They produced chips for pacemakers. These pacemakers won't need any batteries because the chips will use the body and draw the energy they need to run from the body itself. So there is a lot going on, and then specifically when it comes to SMEs and startups, we all know what the problems are. Now, when it comes to the wider chips industry, it depends a bit on the market. When it comes to leading-edge chips, looking at what happened with Intel and Magdeburg, which imploded as a project, it's what we discussed this morning, demand. You also need demand, and then, of course, you need the proper conditions. Our industry is very energy intensive. We all know what the energy prices are like in Europe. And then to create a demand for leading edge chips, then we must invest in chip design, and we must catch up to companies like NVIDIA and others. But my view is that we should play to our strength, and Europe is very good in what is called essential chips, the daily bread and butter chips, which were mentioned throughout the day by our colleagues from Mercedes and others. And just to give you a picture, I mean, this is not a small market. The German car manufacturers, they lost 100 billion euros during the chip shortage because chips which might have cost 5 cents for the remote control of your BMW, they were not available. So it's not a small market. And one other thing is if people speak about AI chips is also not NVIDIA only. It's everything. Also on mature nodes, you have self-learning radar sensors for cars. And now what is happening now, I was very happy that you mentioned robotics. We're moving to the world of physical AI. AI will be everywhere. And in a few years, the way we live and work will be very different from what it is right now. And this is where Europe is good. And even looking at AI data centers, the American Semiconductor Industry Association, they're working on a report to break down the average server stack. And the preliminary assessment was that you have at least 4,500 different chips in a normal server stack. So, and these are chips reproduced here in Europe. The main problem is leading edge chips. I think we can catch up, but then we also need the right framework conditions. But then we must be also honest as to who can actually produce those. And if you look at the current companies right now worldwide, Intel didn't manage to do so. There's pretty much no one left apart from TSMC. And that's the reality. And then we as Europeans must think about whether we want to be even more dependent on a company which is already pretty much dominating the semiconductor market, has in the foundry business an overall market share of over 60%, and when it comes to leading edge nodes of over 90%. So that's the main challenge. And maybe one last point, I think what we really need actually in Europe, and I'm surprised we don't have it yet, we need a clear critical technology roadmap strategy with clear benchmarks which are business case backed. And now with the upcoming revision of the European Chips Act, we must make sure that it is aligned with the Quantum Act. We must make sure that the plans in the action plan on automotive to develop a European soft and hardware platform for Europe are well aligned. We must make sure that it is aligned with the Space Act, with all the defense instruments and anything else which is coming up in terms of innovation in robotics and other sectors. And I'm just surprised that we're not having that. In Germany, the new government adopted the high-tech agenda last year. And just look at China, what they're doing. They have a very clear strategy for critical technologies. I absolutely agree with everyone. We have so many strategies, which is why I say, yes, we need another one, but it must be clearly backed by benchmarks and it must be implemented. Let's get things done.
Yeah, Nick, you had a thought? Yep. Nick, you had a thought there?
Yeah, very quickly, because I think it's an excellent point. So the main question that we are asking ourselves when we're looking at any of the critical technologies right now is, how big is the sovereignty premium and who's going to pay for it? So sovereignty premium in a sense of, if we, for example, want to build an alternative to SpaceX to not be completely dependent on SpaceX, we will need to invest. And initially the service is going to not only cost more, but it's also going to likely be much worse than what we have right now. And that's the core conversation that I think we need to have in Europe when we're talking about sovereignty.
Super, that's really great. Rafael, I'm going to end with you because we were just calling for a new CHIPS plan, and we learned this morning that you'll be ghostwriting the second CHIPS Act. So I'll get to you in a second. I want to go to Travis real quick because Moritz was saying how crucial AI is. It's all everybody talked about in Davos. It's all anybody talked about at DLD. Here we go. We heard this morning also maybe Europe can play the role of sort of the smiling second mover on AI. There have been plans and white papers written in Europe. We have this gigafactory concept. We have ideas of how to try and be competitive in AI. We see the Chinese, they wrote their plan. They're going all in on open source to let sort of all the boats rise all across all industries using those models. The US keeps pumping money with SoftBank into OpenAI and Anthropic and hoping that in 10 years big profits will come. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Is it a bubble? Who knows? But the US sort of has its plan. You're sitting here as somebody who sees Europe's strengths and weaknesses. What for you would be, you know, if you're sitting with the Commission and the Parliament to say, okay guys, here's your battle plan for AI and how to get ahead, not just buy my product. I'm just curious to know if you've got some thoughts now that you've been bopping around Europe for a few weeks and hearing all these different inputs.
So power generation is definitely a requirement, and there likely needs to be some real investment in thinking about how you're going to supply the power. Decentralized fabrication. I don't know that you need massive data centers because I don't know that you need massive AI centers. I like this robotics notion. I actually think that the future is decentralized AI, but you still need chip manufacturing. You still need some way to rapidly generate and build very powerful chips. I think there's innovations coming down the line that actually Europe could lead in, that could absolutely break open inference at scale. There's many, many ways to infer. One of the things I wanted to mention briefly is there are a lot of lessons learned from open source. That I was a scientist turned open source contributor, right? As a scientist, I saw some of the challenges, and as an academic, I saw some of the challenges I see Europe also challenged with. You know, big committees, big groups of people, all very smart, all very trying to work together, but a lot of academic institutions don't do much. They maintain, but they don't innovate, because innovation requires rapid iteration. Innovation is essentially equivalent to rapid iteration, to micro failures. You have to micro fail to iterate. Look, organically, that's exactly how things are built. And then you also have to have accountability. That means you have to have somebody who is in charge of that thing, and not everybody's in charge of that thing. Somebody is. And you have to have that mindset of allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom, this decentralized mindset that essentially open source personifies. So there's a lot of lessons to learn from open source that I think you can start to also find some of your innovators by encouraging open source in education, open source in helping people just contribute. That's what I like to do. When I find somebody, young person, I say, go innovate in open source. You'll learn a lot about yourself. You'll learn a lot about gathering others. And the other thing you learn is the necessity for evangelism. I actually really like your idea of we have dev evangelists constantly to try to promote technology. I agree, you need a European evangelism, investment evangelism. It is important. Maybe America had Hollywood, and then that's kind of what helped start the American investment, just people talking about how awesome it was. But man, all of our best ideas essentially started in Europe, actually. So it's an amazing place, and there's still an amazing future for, my ancestors are from Europe, so I think it's an amazing future. But there's lessons to learn from open source. I think decentralized is the key, and continuing to invest accountably and not try, let 1,000 flowers bloom. You're not going to find the one true brilliance to rule them all. You actually need a lot of it happening.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a really great point, because you saw Esben in the taxi on his way to Ukraine. The reason Ukraine is so fast is that they have completely decentralized their defense innovation. They're down to about 4 weeks from idea to the battlefield, and that's because all of the development, procurement, recruiting, even communication decisions are made at the brigade level. So they have literally atomized it all to optimize for speed. And if there's one place that's decentralized, it's Europe. We have all of these research centers, we have all of these clusters. I got here 25 years ago, and the big question was, where's the Silicon Valley of Europe going to be? Now we realize it's a network loosely joined. Stockholm is popping with AI. Look at Munich with robotics and deep tech. We have all of these places where Nick and Andreas are going around and investing. You're flying all over the place because the creators and the innovators are everywhere. Rafael, I want to give you the last word because you're going to be writing the CHIPS Act, but you're somebody who came from technology and really thinks holistically. After hearing all of these inputs for a day and the great people on this panel, what are you thinking right now about why people should be long on Europe?
I think I mentioned, even though Christina didn't like it, but I said Europe is just a great place to be, right? We're great.
Feel good fact.
we're great. We're just a fantastic place. And by the way, this decision to not move to the US, I made myself in the late 70s, early 80s, because I was a self-taught software and hardware person, and I could get any job in Silicon Valley. Or in Seattle for that matter. I met Bill Gates when Microsoft was 65 people, right? Stupid financial decision not to join, right? But the reason I didn't was I wanted to live in Europe because I really enjoy the place for that diversity, for that rooting in humanism, for this having created the Age of Enlightenment and thus invented science, where open source is a direct descendant from the ideas of science, isn't it? So we're taking those ideas from the Age of Enlightenment into software and into innovation. So I just thought this is the place to be. So I did this commercially my whole life, and then went into open source in 2001 by joining SUSE Linux as an investor, and then we created business models around open source, and since then I'm preaching and teaching open source business models and stuff. And then eventually I got this call to build this agency called, there's sort of the German DARPA. And you go like, wow, these are two big words, right? But of course Eisenhower invented NASA and DARPA for a reason, because his own federal departments, ministries, were kind of stuck like we have it here too. And you needed more agility eventually to get to the moon and to create Silicon Valley.
I recall the Werner von Braun came to Huntsville, Alabama, so a European built NASA there.
Well, I don't think they really asked him.
It was a race with the Russians. There's a whole book's written on that.
Yeah, right. And I'm just reading George Dyson's book on his father's journey through all this, and they actually wanted to build a rocket that was propelled by nuclear bombs that exploded behind the rocket. I mean, this was serious. Project Orion, read about this. This is how the thinking in the 50s was. Werner won the race because they did normal propellant. Just imagine this, well, crazy shit. That was the times, and super innovative, and they got to the moon first, and they created this whole industry, so that was quite successful. When I want to boil it down is, I think Europe is a great place for what we at Sprint call the serendipity culture. And that's pretty much going back to this thinking of don't try to predict the future, just take the next step and seize the opportunity that's ahead. Just go the next step and then the next step, and be awake, seeing those things. When you arrive and you're successful, you totally know why you did this, right? You turn back and say, and then I decided I'm going to build. Fuck, you don't, right? You never did. And this is why when you're asking successful entrepreneurs, how did you do this? This is not worth your time, because they don't know, right? But then there are people that have done it 5 times, and you go like, now what's the trick? And they will be very honest and say, I really didn't know what I was doing. This just felt right. I was totally naive. I didn't know what I was doing, right? But then I thought it through, and then I did this and then the other thing, and obviously somehow this worked, and I got lucky, and I met these great people and what have you. And this is how this works. And if you now think this from an administrative, government administration point of view, we're doing just the opposite so far. This is why it's almost ironic to say that scientific institutes are not innovative. You go like, what's their job then? Right? How could this be? Because this is how we're financing them. We're discouraging risk. Because you have to write these applications for grants and project financing, and you're spending 80% of your time on this crap, and then government shows up and says, now prove how you spent your money, and did you not spend it on luxurious travel to what have you, but instead on the machines that you promised to buy eventually. So all this micromanagement kills serendipity culture. So everything that we do to enable serendipity culture will create success. And we'll also have the great people, and not everybody needs to be this entrepreneur, but we just need a bunch, right? And we need to make their lives as easy as possible. They will create the wealth that everybody can live from. I think just living in this mindset, decomplexifies everything. It's very simple. Just clear the path, leave these people alone to do their thing, right? Help them to get to the funds and to just do it, and look at the results. And who does not deliver results may not receive the next funds, but don't have them prove how they spent the bloody money. If somebody wants to solve a problem, they're not going to waste the money. Right? We're seeing this at Sprint. We're not controlling how people spend the money in challenges, for example. Not at all, 0. right? You send an invoice, you get the money. But eventually you will show up and show what you've done with the money, what the results are. Right? And if they are not good, you're not getting additional funding. It's very simple. So guess what? Everybody's super honest. Right? Everybody's super fast. Everybody pulls in other means of supporting these projects and allows for serendipity because they didn't need to tell us what they're going to do in the next 20 steps, but just what their goal is. And even if they're moving the goalpost, they're saying we would try to do it this way, it didn't work. Now we do this, and it's going to be a little different. We're like, okay, just go do it. It's so simple. If we do more in this wonderful Europe, in this great place, I think we're up for a great future. The motto T-shirt, and I'm going to send you all one, for Sprint for this season is "Pessimism is a waste of time." Because it leads to nothing. It doesn't mean not to be realistic, right? Okay, you're all getting the T-shirt, right?
So Christina will finance the swag for us. So we're done. I'm going to repeat what Christina said this morning for those who weren't here to hear the key takeaways from this day, because I think they were echoed perfectly on this panel. First of all, the poetry for Europe, which RAFAEL added actually as the fourth point, which is that Europe is the best place in the world. So it's the feel-good factor. But no, the other three key takeaways: Europe is a superpower. I think it's important that we all remember that. The other one, there is so much going on. You start to get an idea of it. But then to me, the key message also from this panel is, with apologies to Anna and the Commission and the Parliament and everyone in Brussels, it is about the regulation, yes, but it's also about us and what we're doing and what we're building. So let's get out there and build. Absolutely. Thanks to this panel.
Okay.